I'm not a fan of soups, mainly because, you heat them up. Now, I'm a microwave person. You got your stovetop people and your microwave people. I've got too many things going on in my life. I'm a microwave person. But what I hate about it is when you put the soup in, we haven't figured out a system where the bowl does not become searingly hot when you try and take it out. Do you know what I mean? Like, soup, for some reason, should be an easy meal, quick, but you lose your fingertips.
Welcome to the Reindl Report.
Hey, here's a hot take for you. Steph Curry, most overrated basketball player I've ever seen.
A podcast out of San Diego, California that rewrites the definition of mediocrity.
Yeah, and I don't trust anyone that calls a hot dog a sandwich. Are you crazy?
Are you stupid or something?
And I'll tell you another thing. You know what? I think pineapples do belong on pizza.
I'm as stupid as stupid does.
I think watching pitchers try to hit in baseball is one of the worst things in all of sports.
Oh my God, Paul, you make me so mad sometimes.
And I don't want to hear any of this 6-0 in the finals. LeBron James will retire as the GOAT.
Shut the up! Now, here's your host, Paul Reindl.
Well, hey, that sounded just a little bit different from the last podcast we did. I like it. How's it going, everyone? Episode 45 of the Reindl Report. I am Paul Reindl. This is the Reindl Report, typically a sports podcast based out of San Diego, California, but we're going to be switching things up a little bit on this episode. Not as many ridiculous hot takes like you just heard in the open there. Maybe we might get to like pineapples on pizza, if you're one of those absolute psychopaths that call a hot dog a sandwich. We might get to that. I'm not sure. But this podcast is being recorded on July 3rd, on the eve of Independence Day. And so I thought, what better thing to do than we're going to take a break from sports. And something that I love, something that I am passionate about, something that I have not actually done, but would love to do at some point is stand-up comedy. So I am joined by a stand-up comic on this edition of the Reindl Report. He has worked for Conan O'Brien. He's worked with NBC Sports. He's done some really cool stuff with NBC Sports. So we'll get some of his stories there. We'll keep it a little bit sports-centered there, and then we will kind of dive back into comedy, the stand-up bit, and what he's been up to. He's currently working on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. His name is Billy Gleeson. He's on Twitter, Instagram, all that other social media platforms at Full of Gleeson. Billy, thank you for joining me on this episode. Happy to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me, mate. Pleasure to be here. I'm glad you had the day before Independence Day, you decided to invite one of the guys that lost. I appreciate you taking the time to do so. Very, very kind of you to reach out.
As you can tell if you're listening, Billy has a stereotypical New York accent.
Yeah, somewhat. It's somewhat started to, come over me. Yeah, no, I'm, for those of you obviously that don't know, I'm from London, so for all the people that keep saying Australia, I guess I can't curse on your show, so I guess I'll stop there.
Well, it is a podcast. We are off the air. This is an off-air podcast. So if it happens, it happens. It's not the end of the world, but I appreciate you looking out.
Great.
Before we get into things, have you ever referred to or heard of somebody referring to a hot dog as a sandwich?
I've not even heard someone trying. I've heard people try to refer to hot dogs as food, which is just as scandalous, really. I'm not a massive fan of just a hot dog to begin with, but I'm guessing that's a whole different question to begin with, isn't it?
You don't think hot dog is food?
No, not really. Not really. I'm offending every American that's going to be eating them tomorrow, I'm pretty sure. But I'm not a big fan. When you go to a barbecue and someone says, "Do you want a burger or do you want a hot dog?" Who in their right mind goes hot dog? Sure.
Yeah, there's not a lot of substance there, but I know people that call soup food.
That's fair. That does waver towards a drink. That's dangerously close to a drink.
If you can use a straw, I don't know if I'd call it food, but I also wouldn't necessarily call it a drink. It's kind of just right in the middle, but I certainly wouldn't call it food.
No, it's I don't know. It is in a class on its own. I'm not a fan of soups mainly because you heat them up. Now I'm a microwave person. You got your stovetop people and your microwave people. I've got too many things going on in my life. I'm a microwave person, but what I hate about it is when you put the soup in, that we haven't figured out a system where the bowl does not become searingly hot when you try and take it out. Do you know what I mean? Like, soup, for some reason, should be an easy meal, quick, but you lose your fingertips whenever you consume it. And that's probably the thing I'm least a fan of when it comes to soup. And then you have to wait about 25 minutes for it actually to become edible and not nuclear.
Right, and I guess that's kind of the price you pay for going with the microwave over, sitting there for a whole 3 to 4 minutes over the stovetop. I also am a microwave person, and you got to get the oven mitts out. You got to, it's just you're risking injury. Well, hey, let's. I want to start with some sports before I completely, turn off my audience. Although I think a lot of people that like sports will also like some stand-up comedy, and I'm excited to pick your brain on the world of comedy. But as I mentioned, bringing you on, you worked previously for NBC Sports, and we've known each other for several years. I've been following you on Instagram and all that, and I've seen you've done some pretty cool things. I mean, you've been to the Olympics. I saw you at WrestleMania a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've been to like a Super Bowl or anything. WrestleMania sounds pretty insane to me, and I'm not by any means, a wrestling fan. I couldn't tell you anybody other than like John Cena that's still doing it. But I've kind of always had this part of me that's like, man, if somebody like gave me free tickets or they were like $10, I'd probably go to like a WWE event. What was one of your favorite sports events that you were either working at or got to attend through that job?
Oh man, I'll say just to preface, when you were saying about the WWE, that wasn't a work excursion, but I think I actually took a week off of work for that. But I'll tell you, it was absolutely sensational. And I think for anybody that goes to something like that, I think if you do muster up the cash to do so, you won't regret it. And adult beverages are recommended, but a fantastic time. But yeah, no, back to the work. It's a hard question as far as the coolest event I ever did. I was very lucky when I first started, because I was still living in Seattle. They picked me up for the very first game the season after Seattle won the Super Bowl, which I think you know as well as anyone, the city was electric after that happened. The first ever Super Bowl that Seattle had won. The second ever one they should have won. I'll say that to get the Seattleites on my side. But we had, I worked, oh my God, sorry, an alarm's gone off on my phone. I don't even know what that's set for. Anyway, it's
you got to get that soup out of the microwave. That's what it's telling you.
Yeah, I think it is. So I was, I worked the very first game. It was Seattle Seahawks versus the Green Bay Packers. And I'd been bartending before that, and they just said, hey, do you just want to work 2 days for NBC Sports? They're going to be in town. I said, yeah, sure. It sounds amazing, get to be on the field. And you know how expensive tickets to a football game can be. And, being down there, and I had to do so many things, like Pharrell was doing a concert in the parking lot, Soundgarden, the great Seattle band, performing as well, and working with legends that were there, like Bob Costas and Dan Patrick and Coach Dungy, Rodney Harrison, Michelle Tafoya, Chris Collinsworth, Al Michaels, all these names who are just household for so many people. And I'm the British kid who at that point had probably lived there about 6 years or so, and I was even losing it over being around these guys. They're incredible to work with, and I got very, very lucky to work around them. And yeah, so I did. I worked the Super Bowl later that year with them as well, and a few shows in the studio. So I got very lucky. I'll say that that football crowd was a very cool group to work with on the show, and that was sort of the crew that got me in at NBC Sports in the first place. Kind of picked me up as a freelancer, and yeah, it went from there. It was really a sensational experience.
So after hearing that, I'm hesitant to even bring it up because there's nothing I hate more than, the humble brag, but somebody like myself and in your work that you just described there with NBC Sports, I get the opportunity to work with some pretty cool athletes, some pretty big names in sports, and I try. I'm kind of at the point I don't really get starstruck too much, But there's a couple of times where I'm like, whoa, so and so just said, hey, what's up, Paul, or anything like that. I mean, did you ever encounter that with NBC Sports? I mean, the name that jumped out to me was Bob Costas. I mean, it's Bob Costas. Like, how do you not just be like, wow, I'm in the presence of some pretty high power here.
Right. I mean, you do sort of get that feeling, and then I hear, I've been doing TV in various regards for about 7 years. It's been my job, and so I sort of get to the point of view of I understand where you get to the point of saying I don't really get starstruck anymore, and I mean I've worked with people who honestly the most semi-famous person could walk in the building and they would lose it. But I think everybody has their little short list of people, even if they don't know it. Everyone has their short list of people that, like, if you were to meet them, you would just stop for a beat. Like, you might play it cool. You might. I don't know. I don't know how everybody reacts. Some people cry. Some people, I'm talking about a friend, not myself, maybe myself. But there are those people. Bob, definitely a legend to meet. And the very first time I met him was actually, I'll tell you a story. It was kind of funny. Very first show I ever worked. I was working in Seattle, and I was attached to a member of talent. It was sort of my job to keep them on script, make sure they were where they needed to be the entire time. His name was Josh Elliott, and it was his first show working for NBC Sports as well. And Josh was a great guy, but it was like, my job to, be on headset and make sure he was in place and in the right place in the script. And I know he had a very tight flight to get out of there, so it was sort of my job to help him get around in a busy, busy stadium. And for rehearsal, I lost him. Like, I couldn't find him. We were supposed to meet, and I'm like, this is the first show I've ever worked. This is terrible. I can't find Josh Elliott. People hit me up on headset. Billy, you and Josh in position. I'm like, I'm on my way there. Totally lying through my teeth. I cannot find him. I'm freaking out. I'm stood in position. He's not there. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I go running back to the talent trailer where all the talent's hanging out. I open up the door, knock on the door, open it up. All these people I've never met before, as I said, Dan, Coach, Rodney, Bob. I open up the door and I say, hi guys, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but has anyone seen Josh? And everyone sort of looks at each other. Bob, I remember Bob was reading his, he was writing something and whatever. He sort of looks up and shoots me this look as if to say well, this kid screwed up. And I'm like, well, this is great. This is Bob's first interaction with me. There was silence across the room until Dan Patrick just walks out of the left hallway with a cube of cheese he'd just taken off the plate. And he was like, oh, you looking for Josh? And I was like, yeah, you seen him? He said, yeah, he just walked out. And I said, oh, great, towards the field? He said, no, towards the street. And I said, towards the street? And he said, yeah. He quit. And then he threw the cheese cube in his mouth. And everyone was still silent in the room like, what did Josh do? He freaked out and quit on his first show? My heart dropped for a second. But then anyone who actually gets to know Dan Patrick knows he has one of the most sinister senses of humor there is. And he's so dry. And then you saw this slightly wry grin start to come across his face. And then I said, so you haven't seen him? He said, no, I haven't seen him at all. And then I just carried on bolting around CenturyLink Field. But that was my first interaction with the whole group of the football guys, and my initiation was basically them being no help at all and screwing with the new guy, which I think is, a healthy work environment.
That's great. I love that story. Last thing on sports then, since you mentioned it, everybody does have that small list, or maybe it's a big list if you don't ever get to interact with somebody in this nature. But who's at the top of your list that you would absolutely lose it? Sports, celebrities, music, television, movies, anything like that?
Oh, man. I've got to pick one.
Stephen Colbert doesn't count.
No. You can't say your boss. That's a weird answer. No, as much as, I've been very lucky that, I've worked with, some legends of comedy and legends of sport. And I definitely have been lucky to see quite a few people who are sort of on that short list and have caused me to have that moment where I stop. I think if I was to ever, have the sort of sit-down conversation with someone around today, and I would probably, just melt and struggle to find the words. For me, it'd actually be Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais is definitely a comedy idol of mine, and I think anyone my age that grew up in the UK, around the same time, just absolutely. The Office was almost a revolutionary comedy show. It sort of brought the idea of the mockumentary that's become so famous in, Parks and Rec, and even to some degree the likes of Arrested Development, like the self-awareness in comedy. Ricky Gervais was just, it for me, and so he's a huge comedy idol that if I could ever meet, I'd lose it. Sports is David Beckham, but that's just because I'm English, so that's what everyone has to say. That's actually like on our passport or something like that.
Such a cliche.
No, it's a cliche, but it's legally binding. We have to say that.
Well, hey, that's a good, you got me laughing, so that's a good transition over to the world of comedy now. And
good.
Talking with stand-up comedian based out of New York, Billy Gleeson. You can follow him on Twitter, Instagram, @fullofgleeson. We'll start out with, how did you come to be a comedian? I mean, were you always funny? Like, what led you down this road? And when did you know, like, you had the bug and you're like, this is what I want to do?
Oh, man. I mean, saying, were you always funny? I think it totally depends on who you ask. If you ask me, yeah. If you ask most other people, maybe it took a while. But I was, I don't know. I mean, when I was a kid, I was always fascinated by comedy and just people who had the knack for making you laugh. I mean, we're, Paul, you and I are very similar age, and I'm sure the likes of Robin Williams and Jim Carrey and stuff like that. Us growing up watching them in movies, these were guys that it seemed like no matter what they did, they could pull a laugh out of you, which is amazing considering some of the crap movies those guys did. I mean, looking back, and the fact that I laughed at Flubber is impressive. But I looked at those guys and thought, this is what I love. It makes everybody feel good. Comedy is one of those things that is just, so universal. And everybody laughing together in the same room is a brilliant feeling, and it helps us forget about the crap that's going on in the world, which just seems to be more prevalent now than ever. But that's a long story. So I was always fascinated by that. And I want to say I was about 13, maybe younger. No, yeah, about 13. I remember watching a DVD around Christmas time of an English comedian named Lee Evans. And if you're not familiar with Lee Evans, he was in there something about Mary. Norm, I think his name was in that. But he's a very well-known English comedian who is a mile a minute, so physical and just sweats buckets, very similar to Robin Williams in that regard. He just doesn't stop. And I remember that was the first time I truly thought, like, I saw a bit of a white light. I thought I was going to die from laughing. I couldn't breathe watching this guy. And I was like, I would love to do this someday. And for years, I studied so many other people doing it. Peter Kay was another British comedian at the time. And then over to so many great American comedians, like of your Dave Chappelle's and even your Joan Rivers. I looked up to her massively. Tig Notaro lately. People who just made me cry with laughter. And then at some point, I really said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. And when I was in college, I sort of kept bailing out of it. I was like, oh, I could do it. Like, let's do something tonight. And I never did it. And then I ended up getting this internship at Conan. I worked there 5 years ago now. And when I was there, I remember talking with the writers and a great comedian. Their name's Laurie Kilmartin. And I worked with the writers and wrote in the monologue department with them. And I spoke to Laurie, and she was so inspiring because I said, I'm really into, I was 21, 22. I said, I'm really interested in doing comedy, but I don't know, I can't get on the stage and do it. I was like so many people who want to do it. And she sat me down and said, well, you know what, this is the best advice I can give you. Just nut up and do it. And that was it. And that was all the advice she gave me. She forced me to get out there. She just said, just do it. Once you figure out how bad it can be, and once you figure out that is the worst it can be, then you'll grow to love it. And I absolutely did. I remember the first show I ever did, a lady named Jan Barrett came in to a bar I was working at. And she was a comedian, and she still is a comedian, but she was a comedian in Seattle. I believe she's moved down to Florida. And she came in and said, "You have 10 minutes." I'd never done comedy before, absolutely never done a set. She said, "Do you have 10 minutes?" And I said, "Jan, I don't have one joke I could tell on stage." She said, "Great, we'll see you tomorrow." And she put me on stage for 10 minutes.
Oh my God!
I'd say about 3 of it was really good, and 7 was kind of crap. I didn't really know where I was going with it, but I still loved it and totally got the bug. I still get nervous every single time I go on the stage, and I've been doing it for, as I said, a good 5 years now, but my God, do I love doing it. It's a lot of fun, and New York is about the best city to do it in.
Sure. Yeah, I can only imagine. It's one of those things where I can totally relate to that feeling of just bitching out at the end. Like, you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do this because,
right.
I've been to some comedy clubs, and I'm not talking about like a professional club where, one of, say, Conan's writers drives down from San Diego and is doing a show, because those guys are professionals, but even just like amateur open mic nights. And I'm sitting there, and I pride myself on being somewhat funny. Certainly not like write a joke out and be funny, but more like I can hit inside jokes with my friends. I can reference a movie into perfect timing, and just kind of make a good time happen. But I'm sitting here and these open mic nights, and I'm like, this guy freaking sucks. I was like, I could go up there right now and be funnier than this asshole that's just resorted to making fun of people in the crowd because he has nothing else left. You know what I mean? But every time I even think about, okay, maybe I'll try to put something together and see if I can do just even like 5 minutes on an open mic night, I'm like, nope, not doing it. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, I'll say, to me, an open mic night, every single comedian out there does open mic nights, and then if they don't, they absolutely should be. It's one thing you should never really lose sight of. As a comedian, it's a great space to just, try out your stuff. But, you see people, I still go to open mic nights here in New York, and, you see people who've been doing it for years and years, and you see people that this is literally their first time doing it. And I've got admiration for anyone who tries it. It's sort of like when you see, like about like January 1st, January 2nd, you see maybe a heavier set person in the gym or whatever, and they're giving it a go, and you're just like, you know what, good on you. Like, I'm not judging for a second. Good on you for going after what you want. I'm very happy for those people, and open mic's exactly the same. I've seen people go up there their very first time and rip the room to shreds, absolutely kill. And I even look at it just like, oh man, I've been doing this for years and I'm not as good as that. And then the same thing, you see people go up and they bomb horrifically. But everybody needs to bomb. Everybody, like there's friends of mine that we often talk about, the worst time we ever bombed and stuff like that. And so it's a rite of passage. You have to go through it. Some of the biggest people, I'm sure you heard a story from a couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, about Dave Chappelle completely bombing in Connecticut. And, this is Dave Chappelle. This is probably one of the guys who it's harder to get tickets to his show than anyone else in American comedy, like him and Louis C.K. and Amy Schumer. They're sort of in a Chris Rock. They're sort of in a league of their own at the moment in comedy. But, I do have massive admiration for all those people that go up there and try. But I think the key is listening to your audience, what's working, what's not, and the hardest part is figuring out who you are as a comedian. But you don't know unless you get up there and do it. And so I've got admiration for any single person that wants to try to do comedy. I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to do comedy.
Talking with Billy Gleeson, stand-up comedian based out of New York City, currently working on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Billy, I mentioned how I would love to try to do stand-up at some point. I don't know if it'll ever happen. We'll see. But I do watch a lot of stand-up. It's one of my favorite things to do. Not just watch, but listen. I'm sitting in traffic. Pull up Spotify. They got whole albums that you can just blow through, in an hour. It's a great way to pass the time for me. Makes me laugh. Keeps me in a positive mood. And so I've learned there's a lot of different styles of stand-up comedy. I mean, there's self-deprecation in humor, which is probably right up my alley. There's more of like the outlandish, like Louis C.K. is going to say whatever he's going to say what anybody else will not say, or Kevin Hart is going to be loud and just in your face funny. There's Jerry Seinfeld. Like, what's the deal with these dating apps? You swipe left, you swipe right. How would you define your style of comedy?
Oh, man. Generally, sort of the observational self-deprecation would probably be the category I'm in. I always like to try and include current events and stuff like that, have things be a bit on the pulse of what's going on in the world, because I think with comedy right now, comedy's sort of cyclical, I guess. It goes through phases. If you look back to that's why you ask people now who their favorite stand-up comedian is, and you could say to people right now, who is your favorite stand-up comedian ever? Likelihood, if you ask like most people in general public, they're probably going to say to you someone who's done it in the last 10, 15 years, or might still be doing it now. They're not likely to say someone from the 70s or the 80s. But that's because comedy changes so much. Like the youth of right now they like a certain kind of comedy. And I think what it is it's more intellectual comedy. It's a comedy where they like to, you see people like Trevor Noah going up there. This is a guy who's very intelligent with his stuff. And Bill Maher, guys like that who are very, sort of got a political focus to them, but people who are very clever, and they sort of let you do some of the figuring out for the joke of the joke yourself. It's a little bit, somewhat an inside joke, and even though you don't know him, you feel like you know a little bit more than other people. Whereas I think in the 90s, it was a little bit more shock humor. If you go back and watch things, it was people talking about, graphically talk about what they do sexually or with drugs or stuff like that, which isn't really as shocking to people anymore because. Things like the legalization of marijuana in certain states, or the way that sex is such a big part of TV and film now, and maybe it wasn't in the 70s and 80s. It's a lot more in your face. So people have moved on from that. I think now, a lot of people are sort of focusing on that intellectual style, which I like to try and get into that category, and but definitely be self-deprecating and pull from stories of my life, which is, I'll be the first to say, my life's ridiculous. It's just, it is stupid. It's very much a why me sort of life, the things that happen in this world. But, it's all material. You're always looking around for, the next thing. It's just like, is this a joke? Is this a joke? Is this a joke? And in New York City, I'll tell you, you're never short of material.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned there at the beginning of your answer, talking about how people now will probably pick a comedian in the last 10 years or so. Within the last week, I was talking to somebody who, I don't know how old they're younger than me. They weren't a child, but they're younger than me. They literally had no idea that Eddie Murphy was a comedian. They thought he was just an actor. You know what I mean? Like didn't know Saturday Night Live. Like they didn't know half the people that are actors now were on Saturday Night Live, and that Eddie Murphy was definitely a rock star, comedian before he became Eddie Murphy, before he became Donkey in Shrek. I mean, before he became Dr. Dolittle, he was on stage doing his thing. And so I just, Steve Martin, I think, is hilarious, and he's done stand-up comedy. And I really liked what you also were alluding to with guys like Bill Maher. One of my favorite comedians, and I'm probably partial because he's one of the few that I've seen live, is Dimitri Martin, because he makes you think. It's funny humor. I mean, if you're just, if you're drunk off your ass, you're probably not going to laugh too much. You got to kind of be in the zone and you got to follow along. But when you're there, the punchline is just so much sweeter.
It really is. I think Dimitri is, I've seen him live myself as well, and, he's absolutely a fantastic comedian in that regard, because, what Dimitri's done is sort of what every comedian looks to do, in that he has absolutely made himself so unique. No one really delivers jokes the way that Dimitri Martin does. He's sort of cornered that market of just, the complete diversion tactic comedy. First line, he sends you one way, and then he just absolutely clobbers you second time around. Dimitri's absolutely brilliant with that. And so, I think that's very cool. I'm very glad you brought up Steve Martin as well. He has one of the best stand-up bits I've ever seen, which was, I don't know if you've ever seen a piece called The Great Slidini. That he did on Johnny Carson back in the day. Anyone sitting at home who doesn't know that, I think Paul will happily help recommend it as well. It's just so clever. It's so different to anything I've seen anyone do. And I think that's the goal of so many comedians. There are some people who just want to go up there and make people laugh, but I think the ones who really make it are the ones who sort of look for gaps. Look for gaps in the market, and I think Dimitri is one of those. And I think we're all just looking for that opening, I guess.
Sure. We've thrown out a lot of names. I'm just going to ask you point blank, and just kind of just the top of your head. Who's the best comedian in the game right now, in your opinion?
Oh boy, I'll give you a couple names. In sort of the mainstream game, like most people can see them on Netflix and stuff like that. I've loved Hannibal Buress for a lot of years. I think he's absolutely fantastic at what he does. And then I've got a complete bias to Dion Cole, who I used to be at Conan with as well, but is doing incredible things. Over on, he's an Angie Tribeca, and he's working on Blackish on ABC. But I mean, and he is touring all the time. And if you ever get the chance to see him, I'll tell you, I mean, you'll just be drooling with laughter. But a guy who is totally coming up the ranks right now and did one of, he's been doing it for a lot of years, but just on TV and stuff like that. Gary Gleeson has one of the. I saw him do a set on Conan. It might have been about a year or so ago now, but a couple months back. But he seems to take some of the most boring subjects you can possibly think of and make them absolutely hysterical. And so I'm looking forward to seeing a heck of a lot more of him. Gary Gleeson and Rory Scovel, two guys right now who have just sort of completely sprang up on the scene and, are getting big bookings and stuff like that. Been doing it for a lot of years, but, I'm so happy to see them, really getting a big break. I think Rory's Netflix special just dropped last week. So, I like to go and see shows. In New York, I'm spoiled. I love to go and see shows here. And so I get inspired by a lot of people in a lot of ways. People maybe aren't on Netflix specials and stuff yet, but you look forward to seeing them on there someday. So yeah, I guess that would be sort of a short list of names doing it right now who I admire. Sorry, I didn't pick just one.
Not a problem. Talking with stand-up comic Billy Gleeson. He's in New York City. He's worked with Conan. He currently works with Stephen Colbert. He's done the ranks. He's a bit of a whore. Let's just call it what it is.
Correct.
We all are, though. I'm going off script here. You mentioned something when you were talking about Demetri Martin, how he's kind of just found his niche, and he's really found that gap in the market that he's been able to make his own. And that sparked a question in my mind for you as somebody that goes out there and does this and has to sit there and write jokes and produce content. My question to you is anything original anymore? I mean, do you ever come across, you come up with something and then you're like, shit, somebody else already, Louis C.K. said that like 3 years ago, you come up with something like, damn, that sounds just like what Dane Cook said. Because I see the articles online on Twitter, so-and-so stole this joke from so-and-so, and people go back and forth. So, I mean, is anything original anymore? Do you ever struggle with that?
It's hard because, I don't like all this. The copycat talk kind of can drive me crazy at times. Of course, I can't stand joke plagiarism either. It's very much up to the comedian to, be sort of, I guess comedians get a bit guarded over their work. I think, not a lot of people want to put all their, there's people that will say to me, why don't you put, the setup on YouTube or something like that? It's like, I don't want to because, I'm definitely still rising up the ranks, and I'm definitely of a level where it's very easy to lose those jokes. But I don't think. I think that no subject has really been untouched. We've gone through so many things. Everyone seems to have a Trump joke. Everybody has a dating joke. Everybody has an airline joke. You have sets about all these different things. So, there are topics that are, of course, hit 1,000,001 times in comedy. And so I don't think anything is really, truly sacred. But, I mean, I will say I have had a joke stolen from me. It was a very odd experience that someone literally flipped 2 words in the joke around and tried to claim it as their own. It's not a great feeling, but I guess you've just got to be proud as a comedian of what you do. And if someone's copying your stuff, yeah, absolutely sucks. It's a bit flattering, I guess, at the same time, because I guess it shows you that you're doing the right thing, that you're good at what you're doing. But yeah, I guess nothing is sacred. No, there are definitely some stones that are unturned in comedy, and everyone's trying to find them. But I think in this generation of the YouTube comics, the Netflix, and it's so easy to access stand-up comedy now more than it's ever been. It is getting harder and harder to be original.
I hope you kicked that guy's ass that stole your joke.
If I could find him, I've got to get his IP address off of Twitter. That's what I've got to do.
One of my last things, and I kind of saved it for the end for a reason. Donald Trump, what are your thoughts? No, I'm kidding.
It is the end.
It's just, Trump and just politics in general, they're very polarizing and divisive topics, especially in today's world. I went on a rant on my last podcast that I won't get too far into here, but we've kind of I don't know if it's technology is to blame or what, but we've become so divisive as a group of people that it's like, if you're in group A, you can't even acknowledge somebody in group B anymore. You can't have a conversation, or I should say you rarely, can have a conversation. You're just going to, you in general, it seems like we just dismiss somebody and call them fake, fake news or something, because they don't line up 100% with us. And so there's just all this divisiveness. I mean, and I'll talk about it in sports terms here in San Diego. I'm sure you have no idea because it's not national news, but we've been dealing with a lot of stadium stuff and trying to bring the MLS to town. And there's just politicking, and it ended up, it's a party thing, Democrats versus Republicans, and the mayor's involved. And me working in sports radio here in San Diego, we've seen the effect it's had on the ratings because it's still politics and people don't care. Or another example would be the San Diego Chargers. They're now the Los Angeles Chargers. They left. They were here for 60 years almost. And so we're like, well, do we talk about them? Because, 50% of the people are going to say, F the Chargers. I'm changing the channel if I hear their name. And then the other half are like, well, I care. They were here for 60 years. So I'm going to follow them. So it's just like, you can't please everyone. So when it comes to something like Donald Trump and politics, especially today, where, let's be honest, the content writes itself. You don't really have to write the jokes. You just got to go to the guy's Twitter page. How do you incorporate that stuff into your act?
Oh, my God. I mean, it's changed. I've got to say, in the space of the last 2 years or however long it's been since he announced he was running, my act has changed so many times because of him. When he first started, it was easy. Everybody had a Trump joke. Everybody had to have a Trump joke. You wanted to have your finger on the pulse. It was that crazy. Everybody did it. And then soon enough, everybody sort of stopped doing it because you notice the audiences, everyone was getting this political fatigue from it. They didn't really want to hear about it anymore. And people, I think, in the run-up, getting close to the election, people were scared. People were genuinely scared that this was a possibility. So it had gone from, when he first announced he was running, it was ridiculous. I think we all remember when it first happened. Everyone was just kind of like, yeah, okay. And no one really thought this guy had a shot. I don't even think Republican politicians themselves thought that he did. And when he actually got the nomination, it sort of went from laughter to fear. And you could see in the audience's faces that there were some people that tuned out. And I have a myriad of Trump jokes that I have in my set, but I just remember my favorite reaction to one of my Trump jokes I ever did was I had one where I basically said that I was talking about Donald Trump and that he plays the game two truths and a lie, and that his lie was that he told two truths. And I remember delivering that line, and I got like a smattering of laughter from the back. There was a guy in the front row who just drowned them out with this, and it was so audible over everything. It just rips you apart on stage. Just imagine anybody else doing their job. Like you've just got a desk job and you're trying to take a call or something like that, and as you're in the middle of your job, someone just walks in and goes, it is the most belittling feeling. So that was sort of when I started to put back the Trump things. And then now that he's actually in power, I mean, God, we've got a 71, 72-year-old child running the country. I mean, he doesn't have a clue. I mean, this guy tweets in ways that, I'd be embarrassed if I was tweeting that way when I was 16. I'd look back and be like, oh my God, what was I doing? I mean, you've been on social media for a long time. When you look back at old social media posts when it does that terrible time hop thing and reminds you of the stupid decisions you made 4 or 5 years ago, when it does that and you're just like, oh my God, what was I talking about? That thing I wrote, that thing I thought was a joke, or this picture I took that I thought was a good angle.
Yeah, I go on Facebook, they got the On This Day app, and I'll like, I'm kind of curious, and I'll click that, and there's something, from last year, it's a picture of my dog, that's cool, and then it goes back like 8 years, and I'm like, why the hell did I ever think it was a good idea to put a Lil Wayne music quote in my status?
Yeah, you thought you were cool, you were with it, you were trying to be on the pulse, but that's why you're so happy that delete post button is there. That's what we go back and do, just in case people are going to slide back, in case you come into, the public fray and there are news media articles looking at you one day and they go, look at this post from 2007 when this guy was quoting Lil Wayne and he went to jail, so he obviously supports a guy who went to jail. It's just like, you're there's a part of you that's afraid of that. Like, I don't want people knowing who I was 10 years ago. But Trump, he tweets and posts like that now, which is just beyond me. I have a friend, a stand-up comedian who's a friend, who's been blocked by the President of the United States on Twitter.
Really?
He said it was the proudest day of his life. He was hitting him so hard. I'm like, how childish is this man? But he's actually listening to people on Twitter rather than doing his job and listening to the people in his office, the people in the Senate, the people in Congress. No, he's worried about people on Twitter. It's beyond belief. We live in a society where, I can't remember who said this, but somebody said once, we now live in a post-factual society. People don't care about facts anymore. You can tell them things about the environment and facts that 99.9% of scientists have proven to be true. People don't care because it doesn't fit in with their beliefs, so it doesn't matter. You can tell them that about the environment. You can tell them what's going on with racial inequality, with gender inequality, with the pay gap, with anything like that, with police brutality, all of these things that are happening in America. But if it doesn't quite fit your vision, your argument, sadly, we've got the internet right there, and you can type into Google and find any article that will support your argument. You can have the stupidest argument in the world. Guarantee you can find an article about it on Google. And so that is where we've got to in this world, and it is terrifying that we have this fella running things. I'm exhausted talking about it, but I haven't really gone into it for a while. I sort of checked his material out of my my stand-up, but he's definitely a polarizing figure. I know that much, and I sort of agree with you. You said about the people in column A as opposed to the people in column B not being able to talk with one another, and I absolutely agree. That's where we are. People, we're in the generation now of how many Facebook arguments do you see of people in the comments that have never met each other, but they absolutely despise each other now. They've never met. They don't know anything about each other's lives, but someone said something sort of in support of Trump, and then you're writing like a paragraph-long essay on why you think that person is a spawn of Satan because they supported him, because they voted for that guy and they didn't vote for Hillary or they didn't vote for Bernie. It's amazing. And I'm just, I've eaten so much popcorn just watching those people on Twitter and Facebook. It's amazing for all the wrong reasons. It's pretty much any Nicolas Cage movie. It's incredible, but it's crap at the same time. You shouldn't be enjoying it, but if you really look inside yourself, you kind of are.
Yeah. I think that's crazy that one of your friends has been blocked by the president of the United States. And I totally agree with you saying, why is he blocking comedians in New York when he needs to be focusing on so many more bigger issues? But I'm just sitting here every time I try not to tweet or quote, retweet or anything like that, the Donald, too much on Twitter. I don't want to just completely flood my followers' timelines with my opinions on that matter. They're probably not following me for that kind of stuff. But when I do, I'm thinking there's always a thought in the back of my head, be like, man, if he sees this, I might get randomly, quote unquote, randomly audited next year or something.
Mate, you don't have to deal with the possibility of deportations. Don't worry about it. I deal with that knife edge every day whenever I tell a joke about him. It's become an interesting topic because we've sort of reached the point where jokes have become hard to write about him. I can sort of hark back to my time at Conan, because when I was writing in a monologue department with those guys, one of the rules was, when you're writing a monologue joke, just kind of the regular monologue jokes you see on late night, you come up with the premise of the joke, talking about, whatever it was, President Obama at the time delivered his job speech in front of X amount of people at Disneyland today, and then there'll be a joke, a punchline after that. And the rule sort of always was the start, the premise of it, that can't be the joke, because if the premise is absolutely hilarious, that is the joke, and then you're sort of trying to chase it. And that's sort of where it's got to with Trump, is the things that are happening. That picture when he met the Pope was one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. How mad the Pope seemed to be that he was meeting that family was so satisfying to me, I can't even put into words. But there the thing is, it's like you can't make a joke out of that because the joke is there. The joke is just beating you over the head. I could hang that on my wall and laugh every single day seeing that picture. That's the sort of point that we've got to with him. It's so hard to make jokes out of him because he is the joke.
Right. You don't have to take a comedy approach to analyze a tweet. It's just that you just read the tweet.
You do. It's just people just retweeting, not really saying much. Just like, yeah, just read that. It's funny. It's funny that he thinks that, and that he thinks that's the way the world works. It is absolutely sensational, and I love. There are definitely some comedians I know who have completely checked him out of their material, and they're just like, I won't do jokes about him because. And it's not fear. It's not people thinking it's too polarizing and stuff like that. Of course, depending on what part of the nation you're in, it's probably not a good idea to do jokes about Donald Trump. Luckily, I live in the eclectic, diverse New York City, where it's quite safe to do jokes about Donald Trump. When I was doing comedy back in Seattle before I moved here, again, very liberal crowd. I could pretty much say whatever the hell I wanted about him, and I wasn't going to get any backlash whatsoever. If I do a set in Alabama, I'm probably going to adapt my material. I would steer clear of that because I do not know what the people in front of me are going to think, nor do I know what they have in the glove box of their car. So I would have to sort of check that because, it's been such a weird thing to deal with in comedy because you feel obliged to, but everyone's so exhausted with it at the same time.
His name is Billy Gleeson. He is a stand-up comedian coming out of New York City, and he's on Twitter and Instagram at Full of Gleeson. Definitely worth your follow there. Billy, we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate the time. This was a lot of fun for me. I learned a lot. I laughed a lot, and I hope the listeners did as well. Before I let you go, you mentioned that you are starting a new website and something about a podcast. Please, if my listeners enjoyed this and they want to follow you and they want to hear more of your stuff, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I do have a new website up. It's BillyGleeson.com, BillyGleeson, I'll spell it. So I just put that up, and we actually have, me and my best friend Steve Sharp from the UK, we are setting up a podcast this month now that we're in July. It's called the Hot Content Podcast, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to sit down, have a cup of tea, and it's going to be a guest tea every single month. We're going to sit down, we're going to review the tea, but because the tea takes a little bit of a while to drink, we're going to talk about sort of the major things that are going on in the world, some of the more ridiculous stories that are happening. We're going to just go over those, and then at the end, we're going to review the tea, let you know what we think, and that's going to be our podcast. It's going to be a good time, a sit down, and a lovely chat about some of the most ridiculous things that are going on in the world. We're actually putting it together. This week is sort of when we're planning on recording it. But yeah, that'll be up later this month. So we're getting really excited. But BillyGleeson.com is where the podcast is going to be. Future shows are posted, some videos of stand-up and stuff like that. So yeah, if people are interested. But Paul, I just want to say thanks so much for having me, mate. I mean, this is a fantastic thing you do, and I know you sort of branched away from sports for a little bit to try this, but I certainly hope the people at home enjoyed hearing something a little bit different this time around.
Yeah, I figure with the holiday here, people taking work off and then being hungover on Wednesday, driving to work, maybe this will be a little bit different than what did the mayor do to block a stadium from being built in San Diego? We don't need to go there. No, Billy, really appreciate it, man. We'll have to touch base here pretty soon, and I would love to have you back on at another time. I'll
look forward to it, mate. Anytime. Take care of yourself, buddy.
All right, that was Billy Gleeson again on Twitter at Full of Gleeson, stand-up comedian out of New York. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad we decided to switch it up on this episode of the Ryan Report. Like I said, it's 4th of July. This is being recorded on Monday. The 4th of July is on Tuesday. People are going to be hungover, sitting in traffic on Wednesday. So hopefully this just, we shake things up a little bit and put a smile on your face. That's going to do it. I'm not going to talk about sports. We're just going to leave it at that. And so my thanks again to Billy for joining me, for coming up on an hour here, a little over 50 minutes. My thanks to you for listening. If you would like, this is the shameless plug that I put at the end of every podcast. If you go on iTunes or just on your phone even, you go to the podcast app and just search The Ryan Report. You can subscribe right there. You subscribe, and just minutes after I upload any podcast, you'll get a notification saying new podcast. So I'd love it if you could go and subscribe and comment and all that. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul Reindl, SD, REINDL. That's going to do it for me. Be back probably next week. We'll see how things go. We got the MLB All-Star Game coming up. I'm sure I'll have some thoughts. And then training camp right around the corner. So until then, we will talk to you later.